Each one chronicled a secret history, the scandalous mating of shapes and colors toward forbidden parturitions, untold journeys in the twistings of syntax, and in me, apocalypses of violent beauty in the unremarkable here and now. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today, I get to talk for the first time about the work of Wendy Walker, specifically her 8 tales in Stories out of Omarie, reissued by Green Integer this year. Green Integer was formerly known as Sun and Moon Press in Los Angeles, and originally published this book in 1995. So it's great to see that they're now going back into their catalog and putting such incredible work like this back into print. When it was brought to my attention that this reissue was made available this year, it recalled a gift that I received after I did a video on George Salas's debut novel. He sent me this token of appreciation. It is the first published work by Wendy Walker. This is the Sun and Moon Press version, and it's called The Sea Rabbit, or The Artist of Life. And that's the title of the first story in this 9-story collection, and it is outstanding. In fact, I wasn't planning on saying anything about any of her other work except for the one that's sort of in the spotlight here, Stories Out of Omarie, but I want to put this one out there. It was originally published in 1987 or 1988, depending on which source you look at, and it's still available in a digital format via Green Integer, but I'm hoping they'll make this available in print again, because the first story, especially in here, I am bringing it into this video just in name only so that it could technically be a candidate for Best Short Story when I do the awards at the beginning of next year. Although with the new book, the story The Twin Knots and A Story Out of Omarie are rivals. In any case, just to sort of give you a taste of the writing of Wendy Walker in these 2 books, which have a lot in common, and I'll get into that in a moment. I just want to read a couple of excerpts at random from The Sea Rabbit. This is from The Rescuer. He watched the oracle's hair shiver and glisten with the restlessness of the sea, the tremulous trace of swells moving back and forth, crossing each other and recrossing, the motion of the strange, lambent sheaves of hair awakened in Samson a thought whose current ran as deep and inviolate as any tide. It was a thought in the blood, and it grew stronger as his pulse quickened. Or how about this from Ashipattle? Yet he could see her costume in his mind's eye as clearly as though it stood before him. The splendid bark and silver-colored fur thrown so carelessly across her shoulders like a wolf escaping a parting shot. The ragged convolvulus of her enormous ballooning sleeves, iridescent blue, green, and white, like the splayed abstraction of mallards hung on a door. The dark dagging of the long nether sleeves, like the parted crucial feathers of hawks aloft. The overlaid loops of her meticulously tended tresses, neat and copper tessellated as the scales of an upstream salmon. Hey, if I were you and I just heard those excerpts, I would seize the opportunity to get this work and start feeding your soul immediately. This excerpt is from The Cleverness of Elsie. No sooner had he passed over the threshold and started down the stairs than he caught a sound like raucous burbling coming up from below, and by the time he reached the bottom step, many long honks, inarticulate groans, bleating sighs and small cries, both deep and trilling, had decked the monotonous rumble like small flecks of foam rising off the swell of a threatening sea. And because I can't help myself, let's take a passage from Arnaud's Nixie. As she looked toward the bank now, the bank on the other side of a river, the ragged silhouette of the mill was subsumed into the extended irregularity of its reflection in the water, so that she saw only a suspended block-like shape. The jagged edge of the sky where it met the forest line seemed full and thick and detailed as the dense tract of trees it fitted. And every patch of color in earth, stone, water, grass, and lily pads below found a matching ephemeral stroke of obscurity to echo it in the darkness overhead and in the deceptive, silent shadows. The foam on the lower side of the dam mimicked the huge whorls of milk in the sky above. The mill dam touched one on either side and did not judge between them. The world touching the pond reached up, reached down. Every piece of colored darkness fitted justly, made no inordinate claims. At the very center of the glassy placidity, many yards out, she could discern a delicate agitation that, as it waxed in strength, caused the purple surface to wink with sharp bruises of succeeding color. The faceted disturbance spread until small lavender waves were licking with a brittle sound upon the low wall of the dam just under Esperta's knees. The lily pads scattered slowly toward the banks, and the lethargic scum that made a lime archipelago stretching across the near side of the pond broke, made no struggle to reorganize, and drifted in disparate directions, as though dim-wittedly before a plague. Esperta watched the slapping, prehensile wave strive with increasing height against the dam until her skirt was wet with splash and slime. I'll force myself to stop there, but I hope this gives a sense of the striking poetic splendor of this richly descriptive prose. And it was absolutely no shock to me later when I started reading the scant interviews that are out there. I highly suggest the one on, again, George Salas's The Kaleidoscope. But anything I could find on Wendy Walker, and learned that she was an artist in the visual sense as well as a writer. So we get these artists who are skilled in multiple media, and we can clearly see how the different media sharpen and enhance and inform one another. By the time I was done reading through the tales of the Sea Rabbit and the stories in Stories out of Omarie, I sat back and I just reflected on all the thoughts that reading this work, which is so different from my usual fare, thankfully, because it reinvigorated something that's even older than my youth, that is a shared collective consciousness rooted in a certain type of storytelling that Walker is uniquely adept at absorbing, parsing, and renewing. And I sat with a blank sheet of paper, and I both regurgitated and synthesized all of these competing streams of thought that Walker's work had stirred up. And this is what I came up with. And I think it's the best I can do to describe what you will have in your hands with Stories out of Omarie. There is something intensely familiar and comforting, while also entertaining and thrilling, in the stories of Wendy Walker. In her work, we encounter our own recognition of the earliest yearnings to communicate, not just information, but deep human meaning. In The Sea Rabbit, or The Artist of Life, and the Stories out of Omarie, we return through time to the realm of fables, allegories, tall tales, folklore, and myth. The interweaving of numerical schemata with its mnemonic penchant for threes, and frameworks of chivalric morality that gave a common and memorable skeleton to the strains of oral tradition. The fates and foibles that fill everything from the Bible to Aesop to the Arabian Nights to Norse and Germanic sagas to the Brothers Grimm, E.T.A. Hoffmann, and Hans Christian Andersen. These human, all too human fantasias of fallibility and emotional fulminations have all become a part of our collective consciousness. The medieval tales that call up images of jousting and castles and distressed damsels in chainmail. All of this is part of our DNA as a storytelling species. It is our most basic language, the story, blueprinted during a time of guttural implication and fingers along the walls of caves in Moltravieso and Lascaux. And so we read these stories, lovingly crafted by our contemporary court versifier and psalmist, Wendy Walker, who has clearly absorbed the grammar and lexicon of our lineage of storytellers, to feel deeply the nostalgia from the glowing embers of who we are, each sentence a piece of coal gone gray, but brought back to a resurrected orange fury. With such command of the structure and vocabulary of enchanted, universal, immortal tales, yet also a keen sense of the evolving sentiments of today's readers, Walker decants story after story of splendor and wonder, while somehow avoiding cheap imitation, rote cliché, or conventional redundancy. We feel we've known these stories before we've even read them, but never before in such richness. These are the fairy tales of our youth transmuted into an adult language of such exquisite beauty that not a single stitch of the embroidery can be cited as superfluous or out of place. Walker also reclaims the nearly exclusively masculine register and idiom of these stories and offers the other side of our mouths, the anima. Rabelais, Boccaccio, and Chaucer have their immortalized say already. Now, the wife of Bath rewrites Chaucer in her own image. And still, the feminist element, or lens, is done such that it seems inevitable, not as if fiction is being co-opted for premature activism. We are given new eyes without being commanded to see differently. And the natural world of these characters comes to life with such vibrancy. Walker's rich, sumptuous, addictive, descriptive prose has such attractive, varied, entrancing, living texture. You will swear everything is sprung from a page without antecedent, even when she continues O. Henry with an ironic twist. As she tells us in her brief author's note, her source is this series of medieval poems by a figure named Marie de France. They were written in French during a time when France and England shared a common throne or were politically united. Some sources say that it is written in Anglo-Norman, but nonetheless, what we have here is, interestingly, a sort of translation, interpretation, and reimagination. Walker writes that part of her, meaning Marie de France, part of her intention seems to have been to preserve this oral tradition from extinction, and part to render something original into the literary tradition, which already had received, she apparently felt, enough versions of classical history, which mirrors exactly what Walker is doing here. Walker is absolutely a born raconteur, like the narrator out of the story The Children of Montjoie. Here and there, not infrequently, I would discover something. It could be a building or a garden or even just a view that tasted deliciously of Montjoie. These moments were too brief to possess, but except for them, I must confess, the world seemed to me a dry business. On my daily walks, I routinely suffer ambush by the sublime, the curious, the horrific. So although I've been something of a child all my life, I am an even younger one now than in years past. Perhaps that is why I am so fond of this story. And one feels that Walker has this firsthand knowledge of being ambushed by the sublime. And I am grateful that she goes a step further and captures something of the experience of that ambush in language. One thing that unifies this collection of stories is, without a doubt, love. And I love the way that love is approached here because, as she says in her Kaleidoscope interview with George Salas, she didn't read Angela Carter, to whom her work is likened, for a long time. And humorously, she says that it was because she couldn't get past how bad Angela Carter's sentences were, and she wanted to erase them and make them better. But she admits that eventually she learned to appreciate the work of Angela Carter. I myself have not read Carter yet. But one thing I appreciate about Wendy Walker is that when she approaches love, and especially in adult versions of adult fairy tales, she doesn't like the fact that so many of them are so explicitly and maybe gratuitously sexualized. And in our day of such rampant and cheapened and ubiquitous pornography, it's a relief to return to that subtle, romantic, intimate sensuality of, say, a Colette here in Wendy Walker. Here are some thoughts on love plucked at random. Without his queen, he would gnarl and wither. Without Tristan, she would never bloom. Who unclings vine from tree brings death into the forest. And I feel that it is this unclinging of the intertwining of a deep, true love and intimacy that Walker wants to rescue in a way. But these aren't Disney fairy tales. These contain all of the shocks of life that one would expect. Yet there's still that amorous playfulness. All lovers are children. One of the oddest things about love is its aversion to silence. And of course, there are so many secret romances and furtive infidelities, hidden engagements. And no matter how seriously and desperately lovers swear one another to silence, love has an aversion to silence. Yet earlier in another story, Thessala learns that silent language, the discreet call, love. Love can be found in every one of these stories. In The Passing of Greelant, we learn about knighthood, loyalty, seduction, secrecy, and dangerous liaisons. In Laustic, we learn about forbidden love, the intensity of desire unquenched, and innocent victims. In The Children of Montjoie, we learn about secret love, magical potions, suitors, contests, and stubbornness. In The Twin Knots, the inextinguishable fire of true love. In Deadlock, or The Two Titles, this plays with the differing perspectives of a similar disappointment in love. A story out of Omarie, love, the unbreakable strength of love. In the epistolary story, Swan Hunger, which is gorgeous, by the way, this is the tale of lovers' missives. And then in the final tale, Goatleaf, the private language of love that binds us across distances of many kinds. Like I said earlier, her work as a visual artist has certainly informed her prose. And one of the most striking connections there is that she gives her prose such texture. With a knife, she gently scuffed at the unpainted vellum to roughen its surface by making the tiny hairs stand on end. Then she took a newly cut quill and started to lay in the sizing all around the drapery's folds, between the parted fingers and in the interstices of flame. From a folio she extracted a sheet of gold leaf so thin it seemed dyed into the delicate silk page that supported it. She cut from it a piece slightly larger than the area on the vellum that contained the sizing, and set the piece aside. Then, through a little tube, she blew on the sizing until it became slightly moist. Godlieve removed the parchment, exposing the silk. Gently, she lifted the pale morsel of fabric, leaving the nameless shape, a golden island ragged with promontories, surrounded by tawny reefs. With a brush, she swept the reefs away and loosened the straggling excess from the promontories. But the leaf retained the minuscule imprint of weft. Every once in a while, Godlieve would lift the page and hold it at a variety of angles close to her eye to catch imperfections. And one can almost sense Walker doing the same thing in a way with the manuscript of these stories. Another thing I love are these double figurations or compounding metaphors. In Deadlock, or the two titles, she saw her soul wander among the far planets. Its trail left a maze in the sky. This natural errantry pleased her, and she regained the world in a gladness so great her pores bled from its iridized bruising. The soul, the planets, and a physical manifestation all compounded to give such a triply rich intensity to this moment. I could go on and on through all of these tabbed pages, but I'll just select a couple of them as we bring this video to a close. The opening of what I'm calling Laustic, and my pronunciations are a mishmash of all kinds of things. Mismash, for sure, not mishmash. But anyway, this is just a great opening because as you're reading along, it's hooking you into the story, as all great stories do, but it's doing it by these turns of phrase and by constantly upending your expectations of what's going to unfold clause by clause. When her husband's step had faded on the stairs, Thessala looked down at the blood on her gown. So immediately I think, okay, her husband, maybe this is their wedding night, their honeymoon night. But then the small red bursts on her chest were irregular. I think, oh my goodness, has he shot her? One straggled wetly towards a lower star. What has happened here? The feathered body still flowered in the strain of her lap. What is this that's just been introduced? Its creamy throat, blameless of color. So, is this another person? Why a feathered body? Its wings arching from breathless sides. Okay, so this must be a bird. What has happened here? I absolutely must read on. I'll give one last excerpt before wrapping this thing up, just because it's so good, I can't not. He picked his way across collapsed floors littered with corbels where fallen rafters blazed, through corridors channeling ruby blizzards. Now, the place is on fire. Listen to how many different... Okay, where Walker really excels is in the simple adjective noun, but her vocabulary is quite a repository. Through corridors channeling ruby blizzards, past porches affording fine views of a carnelian sea, golden sheets slashed by darkness, vivid swords leapt up, surrounding him. Gugumar, eyeing a ruined tapestry at which a cordon of orange mouths still nibbled. Wow, what a great visual of flames. Saw the remaining image breathe even as it shrank. Gaping gnawed aflame the burning edge of his own silhouette. He continued to search, dogged everywhere by hectic red dancers. They lined his way, glowering and muttering, ready to spring at his first undesired divergence, or, twittering wildly, cast themselves across his path, at which hysteria he could only glare. He retraced his steps, took a tack that would surely surprise them, diving into a torrent of cinders. He held his breath, squinted, kept on. More flingings of flame and extravagant rubbish. Artists like Marie de France, the 12th century scribe, versifier of the original stories of Omarie, and Wendy Walker perpetuate and renew each other backwards and forwards across immense throes of time. Would I have discovered the work of Marie de France eventually? Maybe. But certainly no one could have turned my head toward her so swiftly and decisively as Wendy Walker. So how does Homer, Virgil, Aeschylus, Dante, Chaucer, Marie de France live on today? Through scholars, historians, and archivists, yes, but also through the passion and vision of reinvigorating artists like Wendy Walker. She keeps alive the old songs, yes, but she sings new ones too, while we readers dance and delight in the penumbra of overlapping shadows.